gave Real the lead, but Vallecano, their Madrid rivals, have equalised 2-2 at half-time. You can keep across that on the BBC Sport website, of course. But from me, Ollie Foster, and the rest of the team here, that is goodbye for now. Goodbye.
Hello, I'm Christian Fraser. You're watching The Context on BBC News, live from Washington on the last day of campaigning for the midterm elections. With control of the Senate and Congress hanging in the balance, presidents, both current and former, are making their final pitch to the base. We'll look at the issues driving voters: the economy, crime, abortion. Where does the environment rank in importance? Today, the UN warned the world is on a road to climate hell. Here, democracy itself is on the ballot, with many Trump-backed candidates, including this woman, who could potentially become Arizona's next governor, still denying the 2020 result. And we've been out on the road in the battleground districts of Virginia. The little farm on Cottontail Lane. Is this just the gratuitous shot of a cornfield in the wide open Virginia space? Is that what we're doing?
Pretty much.
Tonight, with The Context, Democratic strategist Marianne Marsh, the Republican strategist Mark Williams, and former partner in crime, Caddy Kay. Hello, a warm welcome to the programme from Washington. We are almost there. Tomorrow, America goes to the polls in what might be the most important midterm election in American history. Not just for the people who live here, but for people all around the world who maybe haven't yet tuned in to what is at stake. On the ballot is control of the House, the Senate. Governors and state officials are running across the country. And what happens here on Tuesday will set the stage for the 2024 election. With the Democrats to lose control of the House tomorrow, then President Biden's agenda would stall. There'd be questions over money for Ukraine, climate change. Suddenly, the Democrats would be buried under a series of Republican investigations. And the leaders are using every last minute to pull their parties over the line.
There's only one choice to end this madness. If you support the decline and fall of America, then you must go out and vote for the radical left Democrats. And if you want to stop the destruction of our country and save the American dream, you don't hear too much about the American dream over the last 2 years, then this Tuesday you must go out and vote Republican.
These deniers not only trying to deny your right to vote, they're trying to deny your right to have your vote counted. No, I'm not joking. I'm not joking. With these election deniers, there are only two outcomes for any election. Either they win or they were cheated. No, I'm serious. Think about it. But let me tell you something. You can't only love the country when you win.
So what are we looking at? Well, control of Congress is currently on a knife edge. This is the picture in the House. You can see the Democrats control it 220 to 212. On the night, Republicans need a net gain of just 5 to take control of the lower house. It's a similar picture in the Senate. You will see there 48 Democrats, 2 independents who vote with Democrats, and the Vice President Kamala Harris has the breaking vote. She breaks the tie in the Senate. So currently, the Democrats have narrow control. Republicans on the night would need just a net gain of 1 to take control of the Senate. But I want to show you the picture as we had it on the night of the 2020 election. This is the Electoral College across the map, and it is the same states that we'll be focusing on Tuesday night. Wisconsin, Michigan, Pennsylvania, Georgia and Arizona. If you take all those states together, there were just 250,000 votes that divided Joe Biden and Donald Trump. We might also be looking as well at this state here, Virginia, which used to be a state that Republicans and Democrats fought over. It used to be what we called purple, red and blue. There are some very crucial districts in that state that will give us an early indication of where this race is going. Now, many of you like our programme, but many of you also complain that there needs to be a bit more Catty Kay. So by popular demand, she is back, and we have been to Virginia, to the Old Dominion, to District number 7. So, autumnal Virginia, very nice, but why this district?
Why am I bringing you down to
Why to a car park?
We're going here because this district will give us an indication on election night of whether Democrats are doing really well or Republicans are doing really well. It's a really good bellwether district.
And your next Congresswoman, I give it up for Abigail Spanberger. Hey!
Abigail Spanberger was elected to Congress in 2018. Donald Trump was president back then, and Democratic voters turned out here in droves to take back the House.
So why is she in a tight race?
Yeah, I mean, they were the women that won the Democrats the House in 2018 in that famous blue wave. And I think it's an indication of just how tough an environment it is for Democrats this cycle, that even somebody like her, who's a centrist with her own brand, is finding it hard to rise above the national mood. Is President Biden a drag on your ticket?
You know, I have been running on my record. I've been running on the legislation I have worked on, certainly the legislation that we've been able to pass into law, signed by the president.
The little farm on Cottontail Lane. Is this just the gratuitous shot of a cornfield and the wide open Virginia space? Is that what we're doing?
Pretty much. No, look, there is a point, Christian. I didn't want you to think that all of Virginia is suburban shopping malls and parking lots and highways. Actually, there's all of this. And of course, the voters here are very different from the voters in more democratic-leaning suburban regions. So whoever wins the 7th District of Virginia has to appeal to all of those voters in the suburbs and all of these voters.
Audiences.
Yeah, who are much more conservative. And you've got to come here because you know what the state slogan is?
No.
Virginia is for lovers. Wow! And do Virginians love Republicans more this year? Yesli Vega is one of several Hispanic women changing history and running for the Republican Party. Former President Trump has indicated that he is going to announce a run for the presidency again. You didn't mention him in your comments today. Why not?
Because Yesli Vega's on the ballot on Tuesday, and the voters need to know the difference between Yesli Vega and Abigail Spanberger, and I'm interested in earning more support here in the 7th District from the people that it matters.
So what does matter to voters in this district? Well, as in the rest of America, it really depends who you talk to.
The economy.
The economy.
Yeah, absolutely.
Gasoline, food at the grocery store, the high cost of living. There's no mid-class or lower-class living that's available in this area at all.
Democracy, just preserving democracy. I worry about that right now in America. Access to abortion and abortion rights are important to me.
I wanted to bring you here, Christian. This is a site of a Civil War battlefield. And in 1862, in just one day, 5,000 young men lost their lives in these fields.
Yeah, it's a reminder, isn't it, about the violence there's been in American history. And you think back to this campaign and the attack on Paul Pelosi and the rhetoric, the violence of the rhetoric. And I think there's a general uneasiness in this country about where that might end up. Virginia is for lovers, she said. They know the truth. The viewers know the truth. She left me. There was no commitment.
But I'm back.
But you're back, yeah. On a serious note, pick up that last thought. Post-pandemic, post-January 6th, how important is Tuesday night to American democracy?
I've been covering elections in this country since 2000, and I've covered more midterm races than I care to remember. But this one does feel different. I have never heard people talk as often about violence as I have during the course of the last 6 months. I was traveling around the country for a month in June, making that a documentary. And people on the left and people on the right raised the prospect of political violence in this country in a way that felt very surprising and quite unnerving. You've got, the polls suggest 15% of voters think democracy is their main issue in this election. Some of those will be Democrats who worry that there are people out there claiming that the 2020 election is stolen and wanting to skew the system to their advantage for the next campaign. Some of them are also Republicans saying democracy is in peril, and they worry about the state of the country and about America becoming a different kind of country that they feel is less democratic. And the language is almost identical between Republicans and Democrats. It's striking how they almost use the same words, but they mean something very different. So this feels like a tense atmosphere. It feels febrile. I find it difficult to imagine, as some people have suggested, that there might be another civil war in this country, and maybe that's a failure of imagination on my part. But there is certainly a level of violence in the political rhetoric which is unnerving.
So for those people out there, Marianne, who are saying, why do I care about the US midterm elections? Why does what happen on Tuesday night, why does that set the stage for 2024?
Because America's on the ballot and democracy is on the ballot. And if the American democracy does not survive, which it may not after this election, this could be our final election. I know that sounds over the top perhaps, but we've seen many Republican candidates out there saying that if they win, there won't be another election. A Republican will always win elections after that. Then that democracies around the world could well fall. And when you look at the role that the United States has played, especially in the war in Ukraine, holding a coalition together, providing arms, providing resources, not only in the United States, but everyone around the world, to fight for democracy in Ukraine against Putin, against Russia, rather than having those fights on our shores, on our doorstep, that's everything. So for people around the world, everyone needs to take this election as seriously as many people in this country are, because democracy could rise or fall tomorrow night.
Mark, there is a Secretary of State. We wouldn't normally focus on a Secretary of State race in Arizona, but Mark Fincham is telling people that if it was a rerun of 2020 and 2024, he wouldn't certify the result. Yeah. How would that leave America?
I mean, it's in a difficult spot, right? And I think he obviously would, right? But I think I disagree that democracy is on the ballot. Look, time and time again, I have heard that this is the most important election of our generation, right? I feel like every 2 years we hear that again. I find it a little bit striking that we're saying democracy is on the ballot when people are about to go to the ballot box and cast their votes. Like, how can it possibly be on the ballot when we're actually voting? So I think tomorrow we will see millions of Americans go to the ballot box. We're seeing immense turnout already, and we'll see democracy in action. So I just, look, I think it's a lot of rhetoric, right? And you get a lot of rhetoric at this time of year. Now, look, do words have meaning? Of course. But at the end of the day, people are going to cast their ballots, and there will be newly elected leadership in the United States.
Lots of people questioning American democracy, Cathy, but if you look at the early ballot, the people who've gone to the polls already, it's a record for a midterm election. So people are enthused. There's no apathy out there.
No, I think we have to sort of break it down into segments. There were people saying that after the 2020 election, you'd had laws put into place that would make it much harder for people to vote. Some of those laws were put into place in Georgia, and they have perhaps made it more difficult to vote, but that hasn't stopped people voting. You've got record turnout in the early ballot in a state like Georgia. I think the issue about whether democracy itself is on the ballot is whether we are going to see something new. We've already had democratic norms broken by the former president. He didn't concede. He didn't attend the inauguration of his successor. We had a violent attack on the Capitol by rioters. And that's what's making this, I think, feel a little bit different. It's the first election, national election in the United States since all of those events. And the world is looking to see, can America hold an election that is free, fair, and free of violence? And I think that's also part of why there is this sense that American democracy is perhaps a little more fragile than it used to be.
Mark, what do you think we're going to get if, as the polls would suggest, the Republicans take back the House tomorrow?
I mean, I think we'll see a transition of power in the House and the Senate potentially. And so I think you will see that Georgia takes a little bit longer, right? And that may not help the kind of the current situation. It may go to December 6th to a runoff. I think that Pennsylvania may take a little bit longer. But look, again, I keep going back to the numbers that have already voted out there in record numbers and in droves. And so people are clearly enthused about this election. And I mean, it stands to be a really good day for Republicans.
And why do people in Kyiv care about that? Why do Europeans care about it? Why do people in the Solomon Islands care about all that?
Well, I mean, the fact is the United States is held up as the greatest democracy, the greatest experiment around the world. And our role in the leadership, not only in this country, but around the world, matters. And you've seen the difference, a stark contrast between the performance of the former president and the current president. The former president, who isolated everyone, had certain friends, none of them seemed to be leading democracies.
But a lot of the Democratic candidates kept him at arm's length. They didn't want to campaign with him.
I was speaking about Trump. Biden, yeah, that's politics, though. And you have to, having Obama in certain places, having Biden in other places, having Kamala Harris in other places, that's about specific campaigns, specific states, getting out the vote, and all of that mattering. But if we falter in any way, there's no question the dominoes start to fall.
Christian, can I just say what you mentioned? Two places. You mentioned the Solomon Islands and you mentioned Kyiv. And they're both relevant in this campaign. Kyiv, because there has been some discussion amongst Republicans about whether they would vote to carry on. If they take over the House of Representatives, will Republicans carry on voting to fund the war in Ukraine, to give Ukrainians weapons? And there's been some suggestion that they might not do that. Solomon Islands because of climate change. And it's very unlikely that if the Republicans take over the House of Representatives, there will be any more legislation on the issue of climate change in the last 2 years of the Biden presidency.
Go ahead.
No, I think that's fair. And I just wanted to push back a little bit on, where our standing in foreign affairs and what have you. I feel like a lot of this started in the Bosch withdrawal from Afghanistan. Right? So I think once the world saw kind of how we botched that and that we weren't going to stand there, I think that empowered Vladimir Putin a bit, right?
It's a fair point. There are a lot of MPs in the UK who would ask questions about the withdrawal and the way that it was handled, and I know that Republicans feel very strongly about that, and maybe we will see an investigation in that respect. I want to move on because understandably there's a lot of focus in the House and on the Senate, on Congress in general, but there are a number of races for governor that are worth keeping a close eye on as well in the key battleground states for the reasons that Marianne has just described. Now in Pennsylvania, the Democrat Josh Shapiro, he is the clear favourite to win his election against the Republican and election-denied Doug Mastriano, staunch Trump ally, and as I say, he was sending people to the Capitol on January 6th, a prominent election denier. In Michigan, another Trump pick, the former TV anchor Tudor Dixon, who is looking to unseat the incumbent Gretchen Whitmer. Dixon has been spreading QAnon conspiracy theories about the election and the pandemic, and yet she has been gaining on Whitmer in the polls. And then there is Arizona for the Democratic Party. The current Secretary of State, Katie Hobbs, is up against the election denier, Kari Lake. Kari Lake, a former Fox News TV anchor, and really, from a Republican perspective, the standout candidate through these midterms, with speculation building that maybe she could be a potential running mate in 2024. Catty, you've interviewed Kari Lake very recently for your documentary, which I encourage people to go and watch. What did you think about her?
First of all, she's a lot smarter as an anchor than either you or me ever were.
Well,
I mean, she's like actually put together.
A low bar,
she was like, she came into this room, it was 125 degrees out, and she was still looking immaculate, and there was not a hair out of place. I don't know how she does that, but anyway. So she has, and it's relevant in the sense that, people know her in Arizona. So she was already well known in the way that Trump was already known around the country because of The Apprentice. And she is brilliant as a communicator. I was with a retirement community outside of Phoenix, and she walked into the room. What a wonderful house you've got, Rick. Those cookies look delicious. What a lovely crowd you all are. She's incredibly personable with them. She had them eating out of her hand. They all knew who she was. She was a celebrity that walked into the room. And then when she talks a lot about the last election. It's a lot of the hard right conservative talking points that she got, that she speaks about, and has won Donald Trump's endorsement because of that. So there's a kind of contrast between her very effective communications manner and way that she handles a room, and she really throws red meat to the base of the Republican Party, and it looks like she may well win the governorship. And if she doesn't, not just only win the governorship, watch her, because I think her political star is going to go a long way in this country.
Let's have a quick listen to what she told you in that documentary.
If Donald Trump runs again in 2024, will you work and campaign for him?
Oh my goodness, absolutely.
Do you think he will run again?
I do think he will run again, yeah.
Will he win?
He shouldn't have to run again because he won the last election, but he will win, and President Donald Trump will come back with a vengeance.
You talked about the 2020 election and saying that it's stolen. Do you really believe the 2020 election was stolen?
Yes, absolutely. I'm not the only one who believes it.
Jessica Taylor is the Senate and Governor's editor for the Cook Political Report and has been following all these races closely. Jessica, nice to have you on the programme. How do you see Kari Lake's race there in Arizona? Because some of the polls I've seen, she seems to be edging in front.
We still rate this race as a toss-up, meaning that it could go either way. However, it does feel like when I'm talking to sources in Arizona and her pulling ahead slightly in some of these polls, that it does feel like Lake has the momentum there. Now, she's running against the Democratic Secretary of State, Katie Hobbs there, who Democrats are a little frustrated with. She's run sort of a lackluster campaign. And Lake, for all of the conspiracy theories that she spouts, as we saw there, of course, the election was not stolen from Donald Trump. She has a presence from being a local TV news anchor for 20 years. And that has trust with people around there, particularly there in Phoenix, Maricopa County, where over half of the votes are going to come from. But it's still very, very tight there in Arizona. But we are seeing an undercurrent, I believe, of maybe a slight Republican shift in the past few weeks, and that could benefit Lake.
Talk to me about the other races. We'll be looking on the night at, of course, the governor's race in Pennsylvania. We might be looking at the governor's race in Maryland and also, of course, in Georgia. Now, in two of those races, we're looking at Donald Trump's picks in Pennsylvania and Maryland. How will they fare, and what might Republicans think about the people he threw his support behind?
Well, in Maryland and then also in Massachusetts, which I know, of course, Marianne knows very well, those are going to turn from Republican-held seats to Democratic seats because of the candidates that Donald Trump picked. He backed a primary challenger to popular moderate governor Charlie Baker, who would have been vulnerable in a primary because a lot of his support comes from Democrats and independents. So instead, you have a further right candidate that is running there in Massachusetts, and Attorney General Maura Healey is expected to win that one. We have that one rated solid Democratic, and she would be the first out lesbian governor in the country as well. Maryland, there you have Wes Moore, an author and veteran that is the Democratic nominee there. Listen, he's poised to potentially be a Democratic star, really, and he's positioned well closely enough to sort of the center of everything Washington, D.C., that he will get covered a lot. Dan Cox, another election denier for the Republicans that Trump backed over the more moderate pick, Kelly Schultz, who was outgoing Governor Larry Hogan's pick. So both of those, Trump's meddling in that, I truly believe, cost them even a chance at keeping those seats. So those are the two that we know are going to turn from red to blue.
I'll put that to Mark. We'll put that to Mark in a second. Just very quickly, why do I care if I'm sitting in the UK about a governor's race? What do governors do that, again, has an impact on what will happen down the line in 2024?
Well, governors, we saw clearly how Trump targeted these governors in states, in swing states, and where some of them stood up to him in Georgia there, as you mentioned. Governor Brian Kemp refused to overturn the election. So did the Republican Secretary of State, Brad Raffensperger. Trump backed primary challengers to both of them that they ended up beating. So Georgia sort of ended up being Trump's kryptonite. We expect Kemp to actually pretty easily at this point beat Stacey Abrams in a rematch. And then you mentioned Pennsylvania there. Listen, I think Doug Mastriano, state legislator, who again sort of led the charge to try to overturn the election in Pennsylvania, he was probably going to win anyway, even before Trump endorsed him. And there was just a very weak field of candidates, and he had enough of a base of support. But this is one that is really important because the governor gets to appoint the Secretary of State. But we have seen the the Democrat there, the Attorney General, Josh Shapiro, open up a very consistent lead. And this is one Republicans aren't even really playing in nationally.
Yeah, Mark, if I'm looking at Maryland, I'm looking at Michigan, and I'm looking at Pennsylvania, I'm thinking that those are states that Republicans should win. And yet, there are Trump picks that aren't very competitive at all.
No, I agree, and I think it could have ramifications down the ticket as well, especially if you look at Pennsylvania. I think if we had a very strong gubernatorial candidate, that Dr. Oz would already be across the finish line there. I think that Mastriano is continuing.
The coattails, he pulls him across.
Agree, the line. And you're seeing the exact opposite in Arizona, where Kari Lake is such a strong candidate. She very well may bring Blake Masters across the finish line
for the Senate seat.
For the Senate seat, and what's interesting about Arizona is not only she's Trump back, but Democrats put money to back her as well in a primary because they thought she would be the easier candidate to defeat. So, I mean, we can try and pass around blame all we want, but at the end of the day, I think the voters in Arizona are going to vote for Kari Lake, and we can thank some Dem money because of it.
Another governor that's up for re-election is Gavin Newsom of California. This is what he said to our partner CBS just the other day in an interview about the sort of state of the Democrat campaign.
Does it feel like a red wave?
Yeah, of course it does. And again, I'm not paid to say that. I'm paid to say, fate and, I mean, I get it. Look, I mean, I could be the cheerleader. I'm also a pragmatist. You feel it. It's not just intellectualization based on polling. You feel it, and it goes to my fundamental grievance with my damn party. We're getting crushed on narrative.
Marianne, crushed on narrative. Lots of people feel passionate about abortion. They feel very passionate about democracy. Everybody feels passionate about inflation. They feel it in their pocket. Was this the right strategy?
Well, and all of those things are being discussed. I think Gavin Newsom is trying to set himself up for 2024 in case Biden doesn't run. And you've seen it for months now. And this is a topic he's repeatedly gone after time and time again. Personally, Democrats can always do a better job communicating, but I also think Democrats are going to do a whole lot better tomorrow night than a lot of people think. So, Democrats can't help but beat up on each other, especially when you're going into an election where many people think Democrats aren't going to do well. I have a different view of that. But Gavin Newsom clearly is trying to take the mantle of the Democrat who will run maybe even if Biden does. And I think everyone else no one else has said that, but that's Gavin Newsom, and that's where he's got great lines. He's got a great organization. He runs the 6th largest economy in the world. That's why he has clout. He gets attention, and Gavin Newsom's getting a lot of attention right now.
Going to be a crucial vote on the night in many seats in California where Gavin Newsom is, where he's standing for re-election. We're going to focus much more on the events on Tuesday night, but we're also going to talk, of course, about what is happening in Sharm el-Sheikh at the COP27 summit, and we'll go to Pennsylvania, scene of so much wrangling, of course, in the 2020 election. Can we guarantee that the vote will be counted on time this time around? And are there any concerns? We'll speak to the people who are in charge of the ballot. Stay with us.
For the first time ever, television viewers in their homes would now be able to watch the crowning of their queen as it happened.
Whenever we got another refusal from the government, out would come the banner headline, "Government still opposing BBC TV." Because we knew we were right. We knew the public not only wanted to see it, they deserved to see it.
The BBC was the fortress of British culture. You were allowed to make a film in any style you liked. It was my film school.
BBC children's programmes were deeply respected. If it had been on any other channel, it would not have had the same power.
The BBC has helped to define who we are. It's helped to define our identity.
One was able to do what I'm committed to do, which is to make films about real people and real people's lives.
You might say iconic is a bit of an overused word, but the BBC Marconi Type A literally is an icon. The basis of the symbol on most computers worldwide.
With midterm elections approaching, the American people prepare to make their voices heard on everything from inflation to crime and relations with Russia and the war in Ukraine. We travel the country, talking to voters about where they stand on the big issues. And we'll break down the impact of the upcoming elections on the US and the rest of the world. Follow the US midterm elections on BBC World News and online.
Hello, I'm Christian Fraser. You're watching The Context on BBC News, live from Washington with the countdown to the midterm elections. The big guns are out in the key swing states with control of the Senate and Congress in the balance. A familiar row over mail-in votes. We'll speak to one of the people in charge of voter registration in Philadelphia. World leaders are meeting at the COP27 climate conference, but where did climate feature in the US midterm campaign? And where does that debate go if the Republicans take control of Congress?
We are on a highway to climate hell with our foot still on the accelerator.
And we will take you to the election battles that are going under the radar. Our panel have picked their key races to watch. Tonight, with The Context, Democratic strategist Marianne Marsh and the Republican strategist Mark Williams. Welcome back to the programme. You remember several years ago it was all Florida, Florida, Florida. Well, now it's Pennsylvania. And tomorrow night it is the most pivotal race in the country. The contest between John Fetterman, the Lieutenant Governor, and Dr. Mehmet Oz for the vacated Republican Senate seat, which is on a knife edge. In 2020, Joe Biden won Pennsylvania by just 80,000 votes. We all know what happened next. Donald Trump claimed it before the thousands of mail-in ballots, many cast by Democrats, were counted. The courts never did find any evidence of election fraud, but this time they have weighed in early. Last week, Pennsylvania's top court ruled mail-in ballots marked with the wrong date or not sent in secure envelopes will not be counted. Lisa Dielisis is chairwoman of the Philadelphia City Commissioners Board. She is in charge of all the officials that will look after the election on Tuesday night and, of course, for voter registration in the city. Lisa, lovely to see you. I know you're so busy at the moment. How confident do you think we can be in the vote in Pennsylvania this time around?
You can be 100% confident that the election officials here in Philadelphia are committed to a fair and accurate vote count. Just as we were in 2020, you'll get the same accurate results this year.
Lisa, the trouble last time was that all these mail-in ballots were counted not just on the day of the election, but well into the next day. Why has that not been cleared up? Why wouldn't the State House in Pennsylvania change the rules so that the mail-in ballots are not being tipped in on the day of the election?
Well, obviously, if they were interested in restoring integrity in elections and restoring people's confidence, they would have done this very simple fix. It doesn't cost any money, and it basically can be done with a stroke of a pen. But rather than give us the common sense legislation we need to be able to give people assurances and vote totals in due time on election night, we're faced with the complexities of our law, which doesn't allow us to begin counting the mail-in ballots until tomorrow morning.
And just to explain to people, first of all, you have to cure the ballots, right? You've got to open them. You've got to make sure they're filled in correctly before you can even put them into the machines.
Oh, right. It's a process that builds up. So we have over 100,000 envelopes that are a declaration envelope. They go through a first level review where a individual looks at them, just looks them over for a quick review. Then they go to an extractor table where operators sit at a desk and the declaration envelope is sliced open. And in Pennsylvania, we have a secrecy envelope. So once the declaration envelope is open, the secrecy envelope is then removed. And then another step has to occur where the secrecy envelope has to go through the extractor to be extracted. And then the ballot comes out. And then the ballot has to be unfolded and backbended. And then they go to the scanner. So it is a tedious process. And, as you know, people saw in 2020, it takes a while. I will say, we don't have the same level of paper mail-in ballots that we had in 2020. So certainly we don't expect that it will take as long, but people should be just, educated to know that it is because we can't start until Election Day that we don't get finished on Election Day.
But Lisa, I'm going to be sitting here tomorrow night and I'm going to be on edge waiting for the result in Pennsylvania, as will everybody else who is here. What are you telling me? Are you saying that we might not get a result in this key race tomorrow night?
I am saying that if we can't start counting the ballots, the mail-in ballots, until tomorrow morning, that it will take as long as it takes to get through every one of them. But we will work, as we did in 2020, around the clock to get those results as quickly as possible. But you can be sure they'll be accurate once they're all tallied up.
Just a final question. We talked at the beginning of the programme about the violence of the rhetoric and some of it on both sides, and some of the attack ads that have been out there and the focus on election workers. What have your election workers been facing this time around? Do they feel safe?
We've made some changes security-wise to our location and our footprint. And, we haven't seen any of the threats that we saw at this point in 2020. So we're all hopeful for a peaceful day tomorrow and the days that follow.
Okay, well, let's hope so. Lisa, thank you very much for sparing us some of your precious time this evening, and best of luck with your efforts there in Pennsylvania when the polls close. Mark, you heard from Lisa there. The Republican-controlled House and the Republican-controlled Senate in Pennsylvania could change the rules. They could change the rules and make it a lot easier for people to vote, but they have an interest in not changing the rules.
Yeah, I mean, and look, that's the will of the state legislatures, right? And as a Republican, they're duly elected, and that's what they're there for. Now, I am hopeful that we have a safe and secure election in Pennsylvania, and But
then tomorrow they'll say, "Why are we waiting for a result?"
No, I agree. Certainly, I feel like it could be modernized. As she walked us through the process, that seems like a hugely complicated process just to get into a ballot. But again, it's up to the state legislatures and the state Senate. So I defer to them on what they think is best for their home state.
Marianne, what do you think is going to happen tomorrow night when we look at Pennsylvania? I can imagine what's going to happen. We're going to see a lot of on-the-day voters who are Republicans who will, their votes will be counted first. We'll see a very big red tally. And then we'll start to see what we saw in 2020 with the blue tally starting to rise. What are we going to hear from Republicans, do you think?
Well, let's back up just one step. The legislature in Pennsylvania, the House and the Senate, controlled by Republicans. So that's why the legislation didn't get passed. So that's why when you look at all this, Republicans could have passed legislation. It would have allowed Chairwoman Dealey to start counting ballots tomorrow morning and all of those things. And we won't be sitting here until the weekend like we were in 2020. But here we are. That's probably what's going to happen. You will have Republicans voting in person tomorrow because Donald Trump and other Republicans have asked Republicans to vote on Election Day. There will be lines well past 8 o'clock waiting to get in to vote. And as those ballots, the Election Day ballots, get counted first. So those early tallies are all Republican votes on most days. And that's why it always looks like Republicans are winning. We saw that in 2020. And then the early vote, the absentee ballots and all of the others start to get counted. And now you see the Democrats winning, starting to catch up, and Republicans will start to complain that it's rigged.
Mark, obviously, there'll be a lot of focus around the country on the count. What happens if a series of Republican candidates start questioning the result of the ballot? What happens?
I mean, I think that a lot of it is picked up on the media, of course, and then I feel like it creates its own kind of self-fulfilling prophecy at that point. Quite honestly, I can't tell you what happens, right? I'm hopeful especially in regards to what happened last time, that people are accepting of results of elections. Like, I am hopeful that obviously Republicans win. That's hopeful number one. But that people accept it. Like, if you go, your vote should be counted, and it should be a safe and fair election. And so, I hope that we've moved past that. I understand.
But you've got a governor in Wisconsin, Ron Johnson, a senator, sorry, in Wisconsin, Ron Johnson, who says he can't commit to accepting the result. I mean, that is an extraordinary state of affairs.
And Stacey Abrams says similar things, right? So you have rhetoric on both sides, and I don't think it's smart on either side to say it, right? And so I think at the end of the day, we need to have our elections. We need to make sure that there was nothing nefarious that happened. Because look, there are some irregularities that happen in elections, right? I've been involved with elections for 16 years. But
not like the 2020 election. I mean, it was done through a pandemic. It was the biggest vote that we've ever seen. It was tested 60 times in court.
Agreed.
No evidence was found.
No, I agreed. And I'm talking about singular irregularities, not mass fraud, right? But those happen. And I think some of the rhetoric gets caught up in, yes, there is some fraud that happens. Yes, there are some irregularities that happen, but not widespread.
Well, all focus in America, of course, on the vote tomorrow, but elsewhere there is another significant event that is happening in Egypt, where world leaders, bankers and CEOs are gathering for the COP27 summit. And today, another report highlighting the scale of the climate crisis we all face. According to the World Meteorological Organization, the past 8 years have been the hottest on record. This map shows the most severe average temperature anomalies that we've had this year. The heaviest spikes you can see there in Europe, in Central Asia, the Middle East and China. Here's the UN Secretary General speaking today on the scale of the crisis.
The clock is ticking. We are in the fight of our lives and we are losing. Greenhouse gas emissions keep growing. Global temperatures keep rising. And our planet is fast approaching tipping points that will make climate chaos irreversible. We are on a highway to climate hell with our foot still on the accelerator.
Well, let's bring in David Sandilow, who served as Undersecretary of Energy during the Obama administration and Assistant Secretary of State for Oceans, Environment and Science under Bill Clinton. I was just checking that you were there, and we've got the thumbs up that you were, so it's nice to see you. Let me just ask you, first of all, what you make of the debate here in America through the campaign. Do you think climate has featured enough?
You know, there's been some interesting polling data in the United States about the priority that young voters in particular attach to climate change, particularly Democratic voters. They attach a very high priority to the issue. But that said, this has not been a major issue in any campaign in the United States really ever, and this was no exception. It's not been a top tier issue. In fact, it's pretty rare for climate change to be a political issue in most countries around the world. Just by its nature, other issues tend to grab attention.
I suppose what will be the focus for a lot of people around the world is the spending. We know that a lot of the climate money was pushed through in the infrastructure bill. Is that secure, or could House Republicans, who of course aren't that persuaded by the climate argument, could they scale back what is spent?
I think most of that money is secure. That money is been committed, and it's going to be very significant spending under that statute and some other statutes that have already been enacted in the U.S. Congress. There's a possibility of some of this being scaled back, but this is an enormous commitment on the part of the U.S. government to address this issue, which I think is going to go forward.
Can I talk to you about energy? Because part of the debate today has been that countries are scaling back some of their green energy plans. They're turning back to fossil fuels. Do you think there's a case here if Republicans take control of the House tomorrow, as the polls would suggest? Do we see a return to oil and gas? What sort of things might be pushed through?
Well, you know, I think it is important to say that we don't know what's going to happen tomorrow. The polls in our last election in 2020 were way off in some states. So we'll see what happens tomorrow. But as you say, the polls are suggesting that the Republicans will win control of the House. And I think their agenda is going to be to push for more oil and gas drilling in the United States. They're skeptical of some of the clean energy measures that have been enacted. Some of them are skeptical of the science of climate change. Now, we'll have divided government in the United States. We have a different system than in the UK or European governments. And so this will be a negotiation between President Biden, who will remain with very significant powers as president, and the House of Representatives, if the House does in fact shift over to Republican control.
Okay, David Sandilow, thank you very much indeed for that. Mark, let me just ask you, I mean, I spoke to people in Virginia in the farmers market that we showed people a little earlier, and a good many of them talked about gas prices. It's a huge concern in a country where everybody lives in their cars.
Right.
What do you think Republicans might do to bring down the price of gas at the pump?
I mean, I think they will do what's in their control. We have to remember that President Biden will still be there, and I think he will veto every initiative that Republicans try to put.
Right, that's an important factor.
On his desk, right? And so they've made this commitment to America. They want to open up drilling here in the United States. I think they'll pass legislation in the House that does that. If they control the Senate, it'll pass there, but it will die on the president's desk.
So stalemate, and that's the important thing here. We're pretty much as we are now. You don't think anything's particularly going to change on climate?
I don't think so. I think the one wild card is Joe Manchin, and can he convince President Biden to, do something on oil permitting? But I don't know if he's got that kind of juice.
Yeah, but the issue is, Marianne, standing still. If you put this to the UN Secretary General, he would say standing still is not an option. And what we could be talking about is standing still at least for 2 years while they bury the Democrats under various investigations, and if Donald Trump comes back, another 4 years.
Yes, and the problem here is you see we're behind on all of our targets. So every climate target, every country, including the United States, has set, and individual states, we haven't met any of them, many of them off by 10, 20, 30 or more years. But to David's point, it is why younger voters are turning out earlier in this election. We've been waiting for young voters to vote in droves for years now, and climate seems to be the reason that they are turning out in this election on the early voting.
Certainly been a warmer yet. Marianne actually did tell me off air earlier that she has been showering outside, and that's not because of her energy bills. Right. So it's not because of her energy bills, it's because it's so warm. It's so balmy here at the moment. It's peculiarly warm.
Yeah. It is, and it's disturbing. But I would, it brings up a great point about Joe Manchin. Depending upon what the split is in the Senate, can Joe Manchin hold the United States Senate and the country hostage over West Virginia and its coal? When he came out against Biden earlier this week, Joe Manchin's up for re-election in 2024. Certainly something to watch.
You know where the only debate going on about environment is in the country, none too surprising, it's in California, in Central Valley, and they're rowing over water resource. And it's really interesting. It is shaping the battle. Water at the top of the list of issues because agriculture candidates who are Republicans want more of the water, and of course Democrats are trying to share it out, a depleted resource across the whole state. And that's the future. That is what we're going to be looking at, right?
Yep. It's a constant issue in California. I mean, I've seen that argument for years, especially when it comes to agriculture in the Central Valley. Like they need it. I would say the Central Valley produces 70% of our produce here that we get at our grocery stores. And so it's a needed resource, the water in order to feed America. And so I think you're going to see that constant push-pull in California.
To me, though, with the weight of science there is now and the general tenor of the debate across the world, denying that climate change is a thing is almost akin to flat earthism. I mean, why is it such an issue for Republicans to say, okay, maybe we got this wrong and maybe we need to go an awful lot harder on climate change than we did in the past?
It's amazing you should say that because I've actually seen Republicans evolve over the past couple of years on
at a local level.
Well, even at the congressional level, they've evolved some. If you've seen some of the things that have come out the Select Committee on climate change, I believe it's Rep. Garrett Graves who's in charge of there. They definitely have evolved, and it's a consistent evolution with Republicans. But at the end of the day, this election is going to be about gas prices and inflation, and that's what's driving voters right now.
I would just say the large energy companies, oil, Exxon, all
still
of them.
The big lobbyists?
And they love Republicans, and they give them a lot of money for the campaigns that we're waging through tomorrow.
Is it really like the gun lobby? Is it as stark as that
yes.
Republicans can't shift from that platform because it bankrolls the campaigns?
They're very effective at it. They go a little more under the radar, but if you start going through FEC reports and donation report, you see them.
But here's the thing, right? I read a piece in the Washington Post just the other day, and Ron Klain, the chief of staff, gets up every morning. He checks the AAA website to look at what gas prices are doing because they are directly related correlated to Joe Biden's approval ratings. Gas prices go up, his approval ratings go down, and vice versa. So it's not just Republicans looking at fossil fuels.
No, not at all. But for now, until we move all the way to electric vehicles and have the infrastructure to do that, we are dependent upon cars that have gasoline. So of course that is a big issue. Of course it's something that everyone's looking at. But it's also a global issue. It's not just something we control here in the United States, unfortunately. And the war in Ukraine is part of the reason.
And the EV market just isn't there yet. Like you're seeing the market starting to change, but the fact that the administration is trying to make everyone buy a $60,000 car is just not resonating with the American people.
Okay, as we normally do at this time in the programme, let's pause because it is time for the panel. And I do remind people that I don't have any input in this at all. Viewers write in and they say you've steered them in direction. I haven't at all. So what I'm going to say to you is, I don't know what you're going to tell me. Tell me a race tomorrow night that you're going to be looking at that is going to make the difference for you.
The governor's race in Maine. No one's looking at it. It's an early state coming in New England, but it has the current governor, Janet Mills, against the former governor, Paul LePage. Paul LePage was Trump before there was Trump. He got elected in 2010.
He boasts that. He
Bombastic,
does boast that, yeah.
Rash, anti-gay, anti-abortion, and to go down the list. That was Paul LePage. And so he's running against her, and I think that's a test of how Trump candidates will do on election night, because it's just they come in early.
Why that particular race?
Because of Paul LePage. So to me, he symbolizes the early Trump, and now we have all these Trump endorsed candidates and Trump voters and all of that. And to me, that will show us a sign. As we then go into New Hampshire and look at some of the races there, Maggie Hassan against Bolduc. Bolduc also a Trump endorsed candidate. So to me, that is a swing. But you can't underestimate Paul LePage. When he was governor from 2010 till 2019, he was I have to believe Donald Trump took his playbook from Paul LePage, vote by vote, person by person, position by position. They threatened to impeach him 100 times, and he's still left standing, moves to Florida, and then comes back to Maine to run for governor again.
I think the fact that we're even having conversations about Republicans in New England shows you the front foot that Republicans have.
Right, yeah, okay, touche. Go on then, your race.
I'm looking at 3 in the Rio Grande Valley of Texas. There are 3 Latinos.
The Amigas.
They are up there. They are up for election down there.
3 Latina women.
3 Latina women in the Rio Grande Valley. I think it shows just the inroads that Republicans have made with Latinos, both in 2020 when Trump unexpectedly made inroads in South Texas and in South Florida. But I'm looking at Mayra Flores going against Vicente Gonzalez. Every indication that I've gotten is that she's going to pull that out. I think the wild card is Cassie Garcia against Henry Cuellar. Henry Cuellar has been around a very long time. I think watching that race will show us what the night looks like.
Just a quick one before we go. Keep it quick because we've only about a minute left. But Donald Trump on stage last night in Miami. On the opposite side of Florida is Ron DeSantis, who of course could run against him in 2024. Did we already see? We haven't even done this election. Did we already see the starting gun for 2024?
I think so. I think so. I think he's trying to keep DeSantis at arm's length now.
Ron DeSanctimonious, he calls him.
Right, and that's when you can tell that there's a threat brewing. Right, is when rhetoric like that starts brewing. So we'll see. I don't think DeSantis will go against him if Trump says he's going to run.
Yeah, but we'll do tomorrow night first, shall we?
I hope
it would be a treat.
Yeah. Is there a Democrat candidate you see, or is it just Joe Biden?
Everyone's waiting for Joe Biden.
But tomorrow night's race is very important for some governors?
No question about it. There are a lot of people sitting out there. Even though Newsom said he won't go against Biden, he's clearly getting prepared. And you saw a lot of people campaigning in New Hampshire, Klobuchar, Buttigieg, a whole bunch of them.
Okay, Marianne Marsh, Mark Williams, lovely to have your company this evening. Thank you very much. I haven't totally got rid of Caddy Kay. We will be back together tomorrow. She'll be with me for the results programme. We'll be here through the night. I do hope you'll join us for that. And of course, we'll be back for Context tomorrow, focusing on the vote around the country and some very tight contests indeed. It is in the balance. Midterms 2022. Do join us tomorrow for that. Good night.